All right, hello everyone. The hardest part of these sessions is always turning off the music mid-song, but welcome to our session. I am Jennifer Slansky-Juster, Executive Director of the Collective Impact Forum, and on behalf of the forum and our host partners, FSG and the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions, it is our great pleasure to welcome you to today's session, How to Increase Youth Engagement and Partnerships Within Collective Impact Initiatives. Before we go any further, we want to acknowledge the lands and the Indigenous people whose land we are joining from today. Although we are meeting virtually, we believe it's very important to acknowledge the painful history of genocide and forced removal from Indigenous territory. And we honor and respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to the land and honor their pasts, present, and future on these lands. Today, we'd like to acknowledge that this session is presented and recorded on the traditional land of the Tiwa Pueblo, Pawtucket, Abenaki, Canarsie, Munsee Lenape, Ohlone, Coast Salish, Muckleshoot, Still-Quamish, Suquamish, and Duwamish people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people of these tribes. We also would love to invite you to recognize the lands that you're joining on today. If you're not sure whose land you're on and you're based in the United States or Canada, you can use one of these websites as a quick reference to look up that information. So we'll give you a moment to do that and recognize the lands you're joining from here in the chat. Wonderful, great to see these coming in. Another Abenaki, Ho-Chunk, Wabanaki, Shoshone, many more coming in. So feel free to keep those coming. We also want to recognize that if this is new information for you, please do note it. And this is a great first step to understanding more about the Indigenous communities that are part of your area, both historically and currently. And recognizing and acknowledging Indigenous lands and communities is really just that first step. And it's a first step towards strengthening our knowledge, our relationships, and accountability to better support our Indigenous community members. Relationship building and understanding community context are key factors for successful collaboratives, as you all know. And as you build your deep knowledge of the many layers within your community that the collective impact effort that you're engaged with supports, do take the action to learn and build connections and strengthen relationships with your Indigenous community members if you don't hold those already. When thinking about what next steps to take, the Native Governance Center is a terrific resource. It's a Native-led nonprofit that supports leadership development and tribal governance support programs. And they have great resources on supporting land acknowledgements and how to take action and steps beyond the land acknowledgement. So thank you to the Native Governance Center for all of the tremendous resources. So here at the Collective Impact Forum, today actually kicks off what we think about as our fall programming. So thank you for joining us for this virtual office hour. This is the first of 2 office hours that we're holding during the month of August. We have another one in about 2 weeks on how to navigate backbone challenges. And then in September and October, we have 4 workshops that are part of a series called the Essentials for Collective Impact Workshop Series that's really designed to provide practical tools and advice and guidance on moving your collective impact and your place-based collaborative efforts forward. So you can check out more information on our website about more learning that we'd love you to join us for this fall. All right, last thing before we turn it over to our Q&A, just as today goes, this is all about taking questions. And so in this Zoom webinar format, we ask you to please put those questions in the Q&A box. The chat is welcome, and we love that for folks connecting with each other, but it will be much easier for our Frank and Joelle and Cindy to take questions if you can put them in the Q&A box, so it pulls it out of the chat. We will be recording today and sharing the presentation slides later for your reference. And if you need anything, feel free to use the chat, or our colleague Tracy is also available on email if you need anything. Okay, so with that, I am really delighted to invite Cindy, Frank, and Joelle into the conversation. So I'm going to start with introducing our moderator today. I'm going to actually stop my screen share and we can see everyone. So I'm going to start with introducing my colleague, Cindy Santos, Senior Associate for Strategic Partnerships with the Aspen Forum Community Solutions and Dear Partner in Crime from the Aspen Institute team. And then joining Cindy, we have two wonderful colleagues. We have Dr. Frank Mirabal, Senior Advisor with the Aspen Opportunity Youth Forum and co-founder and partner at Lovato, a consulting group that connects foundations, philanthropists, nonprofit organizations, government agencies, and entrepreneurs with local wisdom. Among many other roles, I will highlight that Frank previously served 6 years as Director of Collective Impact in the Mayor's Office for the City of Albuquerque. And with Frank and Cindy, we have Joelle Miranda. Joelle is a Senior Advisor for the Global Youth Opportunity Leadership, Global Youth I'm getting all tripped up, Joelle, with the Global Opportunity Youth Network, and brings over 20 years of experience supporting and leading efforts to create livelihood and economic opportunities for opportunity youth. Frank, Joelle, and Cindy will be taking it from here and doing further introductions of their bodies of work. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Cindy.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. It's such a pleasure to have everyone on the line, and we can't wait for just our interactive questions. And I want first to open by thanking my colleagues for joining us here today. I'm so thrilled that we have an opportunity to hear from both of you. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions, because I think it'll provide a little bit of context about why these folks are perfect to be with us today. So the Aspen Institute Forum for Community Solutions is dedicated to supporting communities to expand mobility, to eliminate systemic barriers, and we work alongside communities that are creating their own solution to their most pressing challenges. So our work expands to over 40 diverse urban, rural, and tribal places, and we also have a footprint globally, where we support collaboration and building community power and also influence. So the forum really believes that communities can be the architects of their own solutions. So we're committed to making progress happen for millions of opportunity youth in the United States and abroad. And we recognize the dramatic community-wide progress really requires that we engage all sectors, that we engage nonprofits, businesses, philanthropy, government, young people, community members. And this really requires us pulling together in the same direction. So it's really with this commitment that all of my colleagues bring their passion, their lived expertise, their dedication, and their brilliance. They really are brilliant to this work. The forum really authentically and meaningfully engages young people who are activating their voices to really create the world that they want to see. So we welcome Joelle and Frank, who every day work to operationalize our belief. So Frank, I'm going to start with you. Tell me a bit about yourself and your connection to youth engagement.
You got it. So I'll start off by saying that it's nice that they invite the old guy to a youth engagement conversation. So that just shows that we're being equitable and we're being inclusive. So thanks everybody. My name is Frank Mirabal. Shout out to all the New Mexicans that are on the call that I see here that are probably friends and family that came to support. So very nice to see you. I run a consulting firm called Lovato. We do a lot of work around youth and community engagement across the country with a number of different partners. One such partner is the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. And when it comes to the trajectory of my work over time, having grown up in the Southwest, I'm born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and having been impacted by systems that historically have not included us in the decision-making process is something that led me to, really kind of diving deep into how do we get more young people engaged in their communities? How do we get more folks that have historically been shunned out of these systems engaged? How do we get more people that are proximate to the issues and not only involved, but at the decision-making table? So I've been doing that work for an awful long time. And it's really super important that young people are seen as partners, co-creators in this work, because oftentimes it's adults making decisions on behalf of young people without young people really being at the table and letting folks know that, hey, look, these are how these decisions impact us. And we are very proximate to these decisions that are being made on our behalf. So it's essential that you're co-creating any policy, any program with us in mind. So I'll pause there because I can talk a lot, and I want to pass it back to Cindy so she can pass it over to Mr. Joel Miranda.
So Joel, yes, take it away. We want you to bring your passion to this discussion.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Joel Miranda in the Pawtucket Abenaki region. So if I saw a few folks in the same region, you'll know that it's high allergy season. So I'll apologize. Every now and then I get a little itchy throat. But yeah, Joel Miranda, I work with as a senior advisor at the Global Opportunity Youth Network out of the Aspen Forum for Community Solutions. And my connection to this work, a long time ago, I've stopped counting the years, but I was what we now call Opportunity Youth. Back then, an at-risk kid, a delinquent, you can say. And I was engaged by an amazing program organization called Youth Build, one of a partner of Aspen and the Global Opportunity Youth Network. And they are found a loving and supportive community, adult allies, peers that were dedicated to transforming their lives and their communities. And after sort of finding my way in the world, realized that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to, help the community, specifically help young people. And back then, really, we were not using sort of asset-based language to talk about young people. And so really was excited to come back into this work, into a space where we were starting to promote asset-based language, asset-based engagement of young people and communities. And I'm very passionate about that. So about 4 years ago, Youth Build was a co-design partner of the Global Opportunity Youth Network. And at some point decided that wanted to sort of to bring some of that passion to the GOYN, as we call it. So that's my connection to the work. Am I turning it back to you? Sorry.
So Joel, I really want to thank you for that introduction. I also really want to thank you for mentioning assets, right? I think sometimes we do take a deficit-based approach to this work, and I really want to ask this question from a place of assets. So how do we really draw upon the assets that every youth brings to the table? I think it's often really easy to engage youth that we consider having higher capacity to engage, when we know that there are other youth that just aren't always engaged. And so I really hope that we can talk today about what it means to really encourage and facilitate opportunities for every youth to bring those assets.
Awesome. Happy to share a bit more about that. Maybe perhaps I can. There are two slides there that I think can help me sort of tee this up. And they're coming. Yes. So I'll start by saying that one of the central pillars of the Global Opportunity Youth Network is youth leadership, engagement, and partnership. And when we talk about engagement, leadership, and partnership, we talk about engagement as a starting point, but the goal is really to move towards youth partnership. And Cindy, to your point earlier about communities being partners and architects in designing solutions, we believe that young people in those communities also need to be critical partners because they have that lived experience. They know what their communities need, and they have a vision for it. Don't always know how to articulate it or put it into action. And so our goal at the GOYN is to move from what we call sort of superficial engagement, which is asking young people a question and then sort of like, thank you, we'll get back to you when we need you, to really partnership with young people, co-designing, co-creating, co-facilitating the solutions that young people can think of and deserve. And our work with our community partners, the local collaboratives, our anchor partners, our backbone organizations, is really to support the skill development, the aptitude and attitude and capacity building that they need to partner, move from engagement to partnership with young people. As part of that process, I think it's really important, and thank you for framing the question with an asset-based lens, is we often think about young people, sometimes it's easy to engage a certain group of young people, right? Because they might have a higher capacity or more aptitudes for certain things. But it's really important to think about the different capacities and the different talents that young people bring, and identify, right, what are the needs of the collaborative, what are the needs of the community, and how young people, each of them having unique set of abilities and capacities, can meet those needs, right? So I think that's the starting point. It's not about young people, some young people having higher capacities, but all young people having different capacities. So you'll have the young people who are great at organizing a council meeting, taking notes, being the secretary, being the chairperson. You then have some young people who that might not be their strength, but they're great organizers. They have tremendous social capital, right, amongst their peers and in their communities, and can really bring people to the table. And then you have young people who neither of those things, right, maybe their thing, but they can move hearts and minds through their creativity, right? The young rappers, the young spoken word artists, the singers, the performers. And so it's really important to think about how we create space for all of that, because it's all valuable and it's all necessary if we're really going to partner with young people and communities to create solutions. That's sort of the short version, the short response to that question. I'll stop there.
Frank, I would love to open up that question for you. Like, what comes up for you?
Yeah, I think that, so there's a growing body of work that we're working on at Aspen, as you well know, around belonging, meaning making, well-being, and purpose. And so first of all, are you creating spaces where young people feel like a sense of belonging? Do they feel connected to the work? Do they feel connected to the adults, the community members that are part of the collaboratives that you're working in? Meaning making, I think so often what we do is we create these structures with adult language and a lot of acronyms, and young people come into the space and we're like, we don't even know what you guys are talking about. You guys are talking over our heads. So how are you creating a sense of meaning making for young people so they can engage in the work and not feel like you're talking at them or you're talking over them? Well-being, are we checking in with young people? What's going on in your lives? Is there any way that we can support you along your journey? Can we connect you to any other services? If you're a teen mom, can we, connect you to some services there? Or if you're struggling in any way with your mental health, can we address those issues? And the big one is around purpose. Can we really connect with young people around their purpose, right? So often when you're talking about the usual suspects, when you're creating these youth advisory councils in particular, right? So like, okay, we're going to get the 4.0 students, we're going to get the cream of the crop, so to speak. But what about the young people that are on the block and they've been selling drugs on the block? They obviously know the economics of supply, demand, so all of these things. And how do you look at some of those things as assets? And if you were to transfer those intrinsic assets they got into something meaningful that connects to their purpose, I mean, you can really do some incredible things. So the thing about it is too, is like when you're talking about some of these other issue areas, if you're trying to solve some of the symptoms related to poverty, why aren't you talking with young people that have experienced poverty? Because they can give you a lived experience that another young person might not be able to give you. So there's so many different opportunities to connect young people to whatever work you're doing. But then there's so many assets that they bring to the table that you don't have to look that hard to find them.
There is a question in the Q&A about that, right? And I think it really relates to what you're saying in terms of how do you engage those youth, right? That you mentioned might not be quote unquote the right fit, right, for a collaborative, or some of the work some of what we want to accomplish, right? And how do we engage those youth? How do we find those youth to ensure that we're really bringing them in, and creating space for them, to what you were saying, Joelle, to like really be able to bring their assets to the table because they have them?
Yeah, I often just thinking about phrasing and terminology, encourage us also to move away from saying things like the right fit, right? Because maybe it's that we're not designing it the right way, right? To engage all of the diverse set of skills and strengths and innate abilities that our young people possess. But one of the things we've seen be really helpful, especially in the early sort of local ecosystem mapping and strategizing, is engaging young leaders in the community to engage their peers. I'll give you an example. When we were, our colleagues in Pune, India, were starting to launch a local ecosystem mapping, profile designing. They said, well, we've hit a wall. We're going into the slums and young people don't want to talk to us. Well, I wouldn't want to talk to you either if you're coming in from this big consultant firm and asking a lot of questions about our lives when we've never seen you before. And so how do we engage the young people who are there, who are leaders, right, who have that social capital, have the trust, and provide the capacity strengthening to them so that they can go out there and engage their peers, ask the questions, conduct the focus groups, conduct the research, right, and bring those young people sort of into the process. And I think like they are both gatekeepers and gate openers, right, in the communities. And it's really important that if we're talking about engagement, that's where the engagement happens early on in the local design and strategy, so that it then becomes truly partnering with young people. Once these young people can access other young people, they are your ambassadors to the community and the community's ambassadors to you. And they play a really, really critical role. And if we're not engaging them, there's a hugely missed opportunity there. I think that's the first thing you've got to unlock. And it also builds credibility with your initiative, your local collaborative, in those communities and those spaces where young people are. I'll stop there.
Yeah, I can expand on what you were saying to Joelle too, in terms of there's a number of different approaches. So like adults are often looking at like, what is the data telling us around certain phenomena that are happening in the community, right? Well, then why don't you have young people engage in the data and research part, right? So YPAR is something that a lot of people are doing, youth participatory action research, young people asking questions of their own peers to collect data, collect information, so they can make informed decisions. You think about how you engage. So I'll give you a story. So when I was in high school, we had this very talented graffiti artist that would tag the chalkboard before class. He'd always get in a ton of trouble. He'd always end up in the principal's office. And so the framing of his art at the time was like they wanted to like criminalize the activity, right? So like, okay, you're doing graffiti art, we're going to get you in trouble for doing that. Lo and behold, 10, 15 years later, he's doing art exhibits in town because there was an adult mentor that saw the talent in him, and he was just a super talented artist. But because there was an adult partnership with this young person that saw the talent in this young individual, they were able to take their art career to a totally different level. So again, that's going back to looking at young people as assets, but even fundamentally, some of the approaches that we take as adults, whether it's research and evaluation or strategy or a number of different things that we do to make decisions, young people can be engaged in all phases of those processes. And most importantly, young people as storytellers, right? The experts in their own narrative. And how do you maximize their own voice and center that voice when folks are making decisions?
I think that's a really important point. And we know that every collaborative is different, right? There might be different steering committees, there might be different working groups. And we also know that a lot of times there's a power differential and that there's positional power at the table, and that we don't always think about power, right, in the way that we should. And I think one of the questions that came in was about when we think about integrating youth as co-designers in our collaboratives, how do we create our work group or steering committee structure so that so there isn't a separate work group for youth, right? I think everyone at the table has to hear youth voice. And how do we do that? How do we create those types of opportunities for youth?
I can go ahead and start on that one because this is one that I work on quite a bit. So in a collective impact structure, you have steering committees, you have a number of different issue tables, things of that nature. There's always discussion about, like, do we integrate the young people within the steering committee? Do we integrate young people within some of these working tables? Or do we create a separate table for young people? The reality is there's no right or wrong answer, but I can tell you a couple of different things that have to be considered. Number one, if you're not addressing the power dynamic and you just invite young people to a table, whether it's a steering committee table or some sort of issue related table, young people will catch on real quickly that they're being tokenized and they'll disengage. And so, you have to, if you're going to go the route of integrating young people into all of these structures, you have to, number one, make sure that they feel like they belong. You gotta ensure that their voice has resonance, and you gotta treat young people with the respect and that it's a true partnership, right? Because so often we treat young people as customers or problems to be fixed as opposed to partners. But if we're going to be partners, then let's level the playing field and let's make sure that young people have the opportunity to actually even acquire some of the skills necessary to do some of this work. So I look at it from that standpoint. When you look at it from the standpoint of young people having their own unique space, I know with the Opportunity Youth Forum at Aspen Institute, young people tend to start any of our convenings with their own space, and adults aren't invited because they want to have the safe space to have real conversation. And once they have that real conversation and they feel like, that they're on the trajectory of, taking on any one of these issues and that they have a formulated plan, they'll invite the adults later. And then, but I know in at least our spaces, they feel like they want to have their own unique space first so they can build relationships and trust amongst each other before they bring the adults in. And when they bring the adults in, we have a whole set of ground rules. Don't speak unless spoken to, and it's really refreshing because they're really owning that space. So I think that based on my experience, there's no right or wrong design strategy to bringing in young people. I think you have to consult with the young people and let them tell you what they feel most comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, plus 100 to all of that. And the only thing I'll add is, yes, it's a both and the value. So one, the value of having young people as part of the working groups, the steering committee brings that voice into the space. A few things have to happen. So often we prepare young people to enter adult spaces, but we don't spend enough time preparing adult spaces to receive, right? And properly engage and partner with young people. Some of that has to take place with the working tables, with the steering committee. Who are these young people? Because even within we work, we engage and partner specifically with Opportunity Youth, right? Young people are not being engaged, right, by the opportunity sectors. And at times it's because they don't know how to engage. So it's important that we put some time into developing adults' capacity to do that, so that they can really partner with the young people and not have two young people sitting at the end of the table and turning to them at the end of, like, asking if they have any questions, right? So that they're part of the conversation. And then the space for young people to connect with each other is super important. And also a space where they're connecting with each other and with a trusted adult where they can say, hey, at that moment, I didn't say it, but I wasn't sure what this meant. And, can you help me understand this? And it's a space where some of that capacity strengthening can happen, ongoing, tapping into their leadership abilities. And it's a space where they can feel comfortable, perhaps, saying the things that they may not feel comfortable in a mostly adult room. So it's important to have both for different reasons, but really both connected to this overall purpose of young people being able to partner in meaningful ways. And the other thing, and connected to the previous question around different capacities, it's that these moments, especially early on, might be more like sort of shadowing opportunities. For many of the young people, this process is new. So there needs to be that moment where they're sort of being onboarded and where they're sharing how to best engage them. So all that to say that it doesn't always happen quickly and smoothly from the beginning. And we've got to be patient. And most importantly, this is what I've learned from young people, you move at the speed of trust. Develop that trust with young people so that they feel like they belong in those spaces.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because that was going to also be one of my questions. We often don't take enough time to take a step back and really think about how our tables have to be prepared to not cause harm, right, to young people, and to really open up opportunities in an authentic and meaningful way. You mentioned definitions, and I was actually thinking, as a matter of definition, I was wondering if you either of you could define, right, what do we mean by young people, particularly opportunity youth, and what's really the origin? What's the origin? Joelle, you mentioned it a bit in the beginning, but what's the origin of us using opportunity youth as opposed to some of the language that we have used in the past?
Yeah, I mean, in the US, at least when I was coming up, we were at-risk youth or bad kids. And around 2012 here in the US, this is the term opportunity youth started being socialized. At a global level, people were talking about NEETs, not engage in employment, education, and training. And we started talking about opportunity youth thanks to some great research and academic reports that were talking about the fact that these young people are both deserving of an opportunity, and they are an opportunity for us to tap into some amazing talent that we hadn't been tapping into. So they both deserve and are an opportunity. And it's interesting because in the work of the Global Opportunity Youth Network, we are then having these conversations in global communities, folks in Spanish-speaking countries, Portuguese, Hindi-speaking, Swahili, and, they had been used to using their translated version of NEET. So in Spanish, it would be ni en trabajo ni en escuela. So it's all about what they're not and not about what they are, what they deserve, the possibilities. And so they're starting now to translate and interpret the terms into contextually appropriate terms, all asset and strength based. But it's been about 11 years now that the term opportunity youth has been being used, and it's over the last 4 or 5 being socialized outside of the US.
Yeah, then I think part of your question too is around like even how do we define young people? That one, has a lot of variability to it, right? So like in the opportunity youth space, a lot of organizations will be working with young people that are ages like 14 to 24, 14 to 26. I've seen it expanded all the way to like 14 to 30. But young people are from birth all the way through, young adulthood, right? So a lot of times the definition in terms of like the age demographic is mostly defined by whatever the intervention, the program, whatever it is. I know that at Aspen, most of our work is situated with young people that are 14 to 26, would you say, Joelle? Yeah, even in the global context. And one more thing I'll just add too, in terms of, so like opportunity youth, another term that a lot of people hear is disconnected youth, right? So that's implying that the system is doing right by people and you're just disconnected from the system, right? When we fundamentally know that the system is broken. So why are we using these kind of negative based terms for the young people when it's actually the system that's broken? And it's not the young people. So this whole movement around opportunity youth was really kind of to promote more, positive asset-based language.
You
And if
mentioned,
it's helpful,
nope.
sorry, I was just going to say if it's helpful, and I hadn't thought about this before this, but maybe with the research that go after, we can actually, there's that report that first started socializing that in 2012. And perhaps we can share that with folks. It goes around all about like why the reframing and how that can be helpful to the work that we're all doing.
Joel, you mentioned before we got into some more of the definitional pieces that at times this isn't easy, right? At times this isn't easy work. And how do adults who are at times initially resistant to youth being at the table, do you have any stories about how they've changed their hearts, changed their minds, and have really then been able to have youth meaningfully at the table? And Frank, also feel free to jump in.
I'll very nicely, for adults that have reservations about young people joining, get over yourself. Everyone needed to learn at some point, right? And I think what the best way to help adults get past any preconceived notions that may be a barrier to them fully engaging with young people is just having young people in the room. I think back to very early in early days of the GOIN, talking about early 2019. I was in Bogota, Colombia, with some of my GOIN colleagues, and we were meeting our anchor partner, folks at the organization that were going to be our anchor partners for the first time. And there was this big dinner at this fancy restaurant one of those evenings with the vice presidents or presidents of like the local banks, of foundations, of companies, big powerhouses. And there were many questions in that room around, why should we engage them if we know that they may not be interested. They don't want to engage with us. This is boring to them. And we had a young person in the room. That was super big imbalance, but it was early days, one young person. And this young person, who now works leading collective impact efforts for our anchor partner in Bogota, spoke up and said, here's our experience. We have been, not that we want to disconnect, but we've been disengaged by you all. And here's our lived experience. Here are the stats, here are the numbers, here are the data. She was very, very prepared with information. And she said, with this type of opportunity, here's what you can open up for young people. She moved the hearts of everyone in that room. And that for those they were all bought in. And it was that brief conversation. And so when we go into these spaces, we need to make sure that we're going in with young people, because they are going to be the best advocates for themselves, for their communities, and their stories, right? Especially their stories of leadership, their stories of their aspirational stories, their vision for their communities can really, really change minds and change hearts. And so, for folks on the line, if you're going to that super important meeting with a high level principal, take a young person, take a few young people, because they need to be part of that conversation. And it's, it's that process of access, of exposure for the adults that's going to help them start to perceive the young people differently, shift how they think about and approach young people and how they engage young people, and open opportunities for young people.
Yeah, I've seen when young people are engaged in meaningful ways, and when there's the respect factor involved, that really significant things can be done. I think of some experiences locally here in my state of New Mexico where young people, were able to reverse very regressive policies. Like I remember 5 to 10 years ago, they had this really regressive policy here within the public school system where if a parent had not paid their lunch bill, that young person was going to get a cheese sandwich, while other students at the school were going to get, a full healthy meal and stuff like that. Everybody fundamentally and at their core knows that that's wrong. When the young people started speaking out and they're like, this is terrible. They started to organize at the school. they started to mobilize people within their community. Not only were they able to reverse that regressive policy at the school and at the school district, but statewide. I've seen young people in partnership with adults, pass school-based health center policies to create more school-based health centers within school districts. I've seen young people, create more opportunities for after-school programs throughout the country because they're the ones that are experiencing it, right? So, but it's all kind of predicated on the level of trust that young people have in partnership with adults. It has a lot to do with the amount of respect that adults come with when they're engaging young people. And then ultimately it's like meeting young people where they are. So, I mean, we oftentimes are creating policy and making a bunch of decisions on behalf of young people. And, we don't even have a space for young people to have that conversation with us to say, hey, look, I don't even know why you guys are thinking this way. You guys are thinking completely wrong. This is my experience, and that you should be responding to that narrative.
What you're talking about really seems like building or creating these opportunities, like you said, that really foster respect, open up spaces for young people to tell their stories in an environment that's safe. And also you're talking about building power, right? Youth really building power. And so we've talked a bit about preparing adults in the room, and we can prepare adults in the room to hear stories, to invite young people to the table. But how do we really prepare adults to share power?
That's the toughest nut to crack, and going from being a young person to a young adult professional to now being an old guy in the room. It's always been the hardest thing. There has to be, as adults and adult-led institutions are coming into this work and deciding that they're going to partner with us, I think we need to be explicit and intentional upfront that this is what this means, that young people are going to be at the table, not to listen or not to speak when spoken to, but to be real partners and allies in the design and implementation of the work. And, it's going to come with some discomfort. I think the higher you go and the bigger the institution, the more discomfort you might see. But it's important, I think, early on, we need to do some preempting and pre-work with these adult-led institutions. And here's who our young people are, and across the forum, on the domestic end, across the GOYN and the global spaces, like we have, and I should say that, on my end, probably need to do a better job of this, about amplifying that and sharing that with all adult-led institutions. Because when we do that, it creates a lot of curiosity and interest in meeting these young people in a different way than they might have thought they might be meeting them before. And so we've got to go in there first and say, hey, young people are part of the work. And if you think that we're worth investing in and partnering with, if you don't know how to do that, we're willing to help. But it comes with the work that we're partnering with.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think that so number one, for those the folks on the call that are part of these collaboratives and the collective impact approach, youth engagement has to be baked into the DNA of that collaborative. And not only does it have to be baked into the DNA of the collaborative, you have to be very explicit about what you mean by youth engagement. Because so many times you'll see a collaborative that say, hey, like, we do youth engagement. We create our strategy and we go talk to young people and ask them if they think that our plan is good. No, that's not engagement. That's not even consultation, for that matter. You're treating a young person as a consumer. So be able to operationalize what you mean by engagement. What does it mean? How are young people going to be involved in the decision-making process? How are you going to share leadership? How are you going to co-create? All of those things. Secondly, show me that you mean it. So if you have a backbone budget, how much money are you putting in that budget for youth engagement? Are you going to be paying young people for their time, right? So us as adult professionals, we come to a collaborative space. There's an expectation that we're going to get paid, either by our employer or somebody else. So show me your budget. Are you Are you putting in money in the budget to pay young people for their time and their expertise? Are you allowing young people to lead table discussions, right? Not just participate, lead them. So be very clear what you mean by engagement. And then I think the third part is like, call adults out when they're tokenizing young people or when they're not respecting young people that are part of the collaborative. So, you know, you have to hold people accountable for the way that they're behaving within it, right? So you can articulate yourself to death in terms of like what it needs to look like, but then how are the adults behaving in the room when young people are there, right? So that you have to call that out as well. So I think all of those aspects are really important. But ask any young people that are aged 14 to 24, and they're like, what do I need? I need some money. I need to get paid. So show me your budget.
Yeah, just building a little bit on that, young people, and again, remember this from earlier days of being engaged by Youth Build, when they commit, right? And they're our best partners in the community, our best ambassadors and advocates, and they will wear the name of the collaborative and the collective or initiative like an S on their chest, right? And often we ask them to do more sometimes, and we've seen this happen in the past in this work, where young people might even put aside some things that are helping them work towards their personal goals to support the work because it feels good. And when that happens, that's like an extreme version of tokenization. We put out a learning brief that I think will be linked in the deck that's going out to everyone. We put out a checklist for some suggested promising practices around engaging young people, and we won't show the checklist now, but among them are, making sure that you're using the asset-based lens to lift and amplify young people's voices, that you're compensating, to Frank's point, you're compensating young people appropriately for their time and contributions, right? And that can look like money. It can also look like some money, and especially in parts of the country or the world where connectivity and access to the right devices to connect with each other and with the work are lacking, being able to connect them to those resources. And so removing barriers to participation, I think are super key. And just removing the barrier is not compensation, because young people need to eat. And we hear that, I need to eat. This is all well and good. I'm helping you create opportunity for other young people, but what about me and my family? Something that we really need to be mindful of as we're engaging young people.
Thank you so much for that really, really important point. I want to read a comment that a young person put into the chat. I think it's really important. So as a Gen Zer, I think we should think about events that are set up where youth organizations get together. We're bringing youth to have fun. And then at the end, we can ask questions in regard to things like policies and how to make voices heard. And perhaps in collaboration between youth organizations, right? And really thinking about the challenges between them and what might make things more engaging. And I know you both have experience really organizing multiple groups of young people to really be thinking together and working together and talking about policy together. So I was curious if maybe you have some stories about what that might look like. Yeah, and thank you so much for putting that comment in the chat, Joshua.
I'm happy to share. I didn't want to jump too quick, but yeah, I mean, over the years, both within the GOYN and working with Youth Build prior to that, we were very intentional about both creating spaces where young people can connect with each other within their local youth advisory group council or an alumni council or a national young leaders council, and then creating spaces and platforms where they can connect with each other and the quote unquote adult-led institutions, making sure that young people are part of all pieces of that. Frank and Cindy, you witnessed some of that last year in Bogota when we were able to have our first in-person global convening, where young people weren't on the table, but they were at the table in terms of the event, presenting, panelists, co-facilitators. We're taking that a step further this year as we convene in Mombasa, where young people will be the first the first faces you see come out as the MCs of the overall event. We're partnering with them to design sessions so that they are either co-moderating or they're a featured panelist or speaker here. And then we're creating spaces where they can connect with each other, because these are many of the young people we're working with. For some of them, it's the first time they travel outside of their community. For all of them, the first time they travel outside of their country. And so both virtually and in person, we create a platform for them to connect across global geographies and contexts, where they can share the work they're doing, share promising practices, and just laugh together and build community. And that is probably the most important piece. And at first takes the most time, because once you can build that and it helps build trust, then the other stuff starts to come into play.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, excellent points. And I got to experience it firsthand in Bogota as well. It was really powerful. I think about a lot of the convenings that we put on, with the Opportunity Youth Forum Network. And so we have young people sharing their poetry. We have young people performing. We have young people moderating panels. But then most importantly, we have young people that have, get to come together in their own youth jam on a certain evening where there's a DJ and they're dancing, they're having fun, they're breaking bread with their peers and other invitees and stuff like that. So I think it's really tapping into, individual stories, individuals' talents, individuals' expertise, their passions, and making sure that you're creating those spaces for those things to happen. But most importantly, the connections, that they feel like they're connected with one another and to a broader movement and community.
So one of the questions that has come in that I think is really important, because we know that changing systems, it's long-term, right? And we have to stay committed to it long-term. And I'm curious how we keep youth involved, right? How do we keep them consistently involved during these long-term system change initiatives?
Well, I think that, young people are seeing a sense of urgency around a number of different issues that are impacting, public safety, schooling, the environment. And then obviously, with George Floyd and the entire racial justice reckoning that's been happening in this country, they're going to continue to be involved. And they're going to be pushing the narrative, whether, folks are going to want to come on board or not. So I think the thing that we can do is look at the ways in which we can support their movement building, and we can help organize, we can help. I mean, I'm telling you, I think as adults, we learn way more from them than they do from us, to be honest with you. These young people are digital natives. I mean, look at what they've done in terms of movement building on Twitter and other platforms, right? So there's so much more that we can learn from them. So we should be learning from them. In a lot of ways, what we need to be doing is, there's been a lot of talk on this call about how we integrate young people into adult spaces. But Joel said it so eloquently earlier. How do adults start to integrate themselves into youth spaces where the young people feel comfortable and there's a trust built to where that can happen? Because in a lot of ways, I think we learn much more from them than they do from us.
I'll just add, yes, agree, and I'll add that you get buy-in, because it's buy-in and patience, right? I started by saying, hey, I was engaged when I was a young person. There are things that would have loved to have seen happen then. It took 15 years to happen, right? So also understanding that some things happen are on a longer timeline than others, but you get buy-in when, one, young people truly understand that what you're doing is not performative, that you're about this, you're about youth partnership, and you're willing to put your ideas on hold and everything you know as an adult on to listen to the young person. And when the things young people are asking for, are proposing, are envisioning, are actually making it to their proposal, the funded initiative, and it's not, and the adults are not taking credit for it, and young people are given their due credit, because then they feel seen and they truly feel like they are a co-creator in the work that we're supporting.
So one question, I just want to go back a little bit to something that might seem a little bit more, I would say, tactical. But you talked about, we talked about really supporting youth, right, through their honorariums, and how important that is to really be able to do that. And Joel, you talked about like youth saying like, this is about me and my family. In particular, I would say in the global context. How have you seen organizations either successfully raise funds or make sure that they're carving this out in their budget and really making it a priority?
I'll give you one example that has led to increasing partnerships. Our colleagues in Mombasa at Swahili Pot Hub, that's in the GOIN, we call them anchor partners. I know in the US you refer to them as backbone organizations. So our anchor partner very early on puts a stake in the ground and says, as we're building out the GOYN team, this has to be over 50% young people from the community. And if I was just there a month and a half ago, and you're looking at this team of amazing colleagues that are all like 21 to 26, 18 to 26 in some cases, and there's such creative work coming out of there. So I think initially we have to start by modeling that. And then we're able to propose and market this, right, to other adult-led institutions. And we have to be intentional. Like, it's important to fund, staying afloat in our and put that into our proposals. But we need to make sure that our commitment to youth leadership and youth partnership comes across when we are engaging existing funders and potential funders. And really important that that trust that trust exists also with the funder, the supporters, for them to learn more about this, because sometimes it's just they don't have the language, they don't have the frame, the mental models and the frameworks, and the more we can teach them about this, I think the easier it becomes, right, to start to get support for this. It really is modeling it, right, and sharing the benefits, the value, both to the initiative and to the community of partnering with young people.
So I said one more question, and we have 1 minute, and I know this is something that we can address possibly. I hope that you'll join us again. Could you give us really quick insights? How do you even start a youth advisory council?
You start by creating an open space for young people to talk about what their pain points are and what are the things that they're passionate about. Once you start with an open conversation about that, you can start to figure out like, we have some existing structures here where we can create a council to focus in on this one issue, or we have a collective impact collaborative initiative where we can create a table of young people to help us think through this particular challenge. I think the biggest thing is just create the space for young people to engage.
Yeah.
Maybe not even create it, or let them tell you
how
they want to engage.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you so much for joining us today. I have to admit that the time went by so quickly, and I wish we had another hour, right? And I hope that this is in reality just the first of many conversations that we'll have. You are so dynamic, and you've been able to provide us with so many insights. I'm going to turn it over to Jen to close us out. Again, hoping that this is the first of many conversations.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Cindy, also, and of course, Frank and Joelle, and thanks to everyone who joined for amazing questions and also for contributing your expertise in the chat as well. So really appreciate everyone joining us today. Hope to see you at some of our touch points this coming fall. Tracy, thank you for supporting this as well. And I know Tracy will be sharing the slides with the the checklist that everyone is hungry for that Joelle mentioned. Here's a sneak peek of the slide that is in the toolkit, in the deck that's going out. So thank you all. And we really look forward to seeing you later this fall. Take care.